Hello, and welcome to the Hibernation podcast. My name is Dahyo Lloyd, and I'm inviting you to join me for a weekly conversation with some of the amazing artists who've decided to stream with us over the course of the festival. Before we start the show today, we'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the custodians of the land upon which we stand. Wherever we are in this country, Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded, and we must be mindful that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. As we share and explore music throughout the festival, we are also on a site that carries the reverberations of many centuries of music and cultural making. Joining us this week is Sebastian Sequoiah-Grayson. Seb is a lecturer in logic, epistemology, and metaphysics at the University of Sydney, as well as a fantastic fingerstyle noise guitarist. Seb is actively involved with the Sydney experimental music scene, performing regularly at numerous venues over the city, both in groups and as a solo artist. In addition to his performances, Seb has had numerous writings published concerning music, as well as logic and epistemology, in publications such as ADSR Zion and the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Say hello to all the lovely people, Seb.
Dahyo, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. I hope you are all keeping well in our suitably surreal times.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting. I was saying when we were planning the festival, I was hoping that we would be able to get it started sooner rather than later, so that, you know, if people could have something to listen to over lockdown, you know, because I was thinking, oh, maybe lockdown will be over in a few months. But, you know, it looks like, depressingly enough, I didn't have to worry about that. But
yeah, no, not at all. I think you're going to have all the time in the world here for this.
Yeah, we'll have vaccines in 4 years.
What? Yeah, great. Have you been able to get a vaccine yet?
I've got one booked, actually.
Good on you.
Right. Yeah, so for Wednesday, that's booked. How was your Pfizer
well, here,
shot?
everyone was telling me that the second one is rough. The second one was a walk in the park. The first one made my left arm, so all the way down to my hand, hurt quite oddly. Where I thought, wow, okay, I know there's something in my arm that wasn't there yesterday. Whereas the second one was no different to what we in Australia called a dead arm. I don't know if your generation knows what a dead arm is anymore, if people are allowed to do that. It's when a child or a boy who is much bigger than you comes up to you in the playground and punches you very hard in the arm or on the leg in a place where it's designed and optimized to cause you the largest, most painful bruise for the longest period of time possible. So it was really just like a sort of like a piss weak dead arm, I'd say. And within 2 days, I was fine. I had no trouble stretching or moving anything. I know some people have been laid pretty low, but it's worth realizing, I think, that it's not very often that an entire population of a country is getting exactly the same vaccine at pretty much the same time. So we are going to hear about adverse reactions in the way that we don't hear about them when it comes to measles vaccines, because they're staggered across generations and age groups and things. I'd have it again. It was wonderful. I loved my vaccines. I want a third one.
Well, I'm glad you've been vaccinated. Like, as much as I don't want to be bailing Gladys and ScoMo out, I think like it is important that we get vaccinated and you know, stay safe. I think people's safety is the most important thing, because that way we can all go out to going to live gigs rather than, you know, sitting at home and watching online ones and being depressed.
I'm going to have to make a confession here. I think and I know it's a dangerous confession. It's the sort of thing that could get me hounded out or shunned. I fucking love lockdown. I really personally I don't mind at all. But I realize that for a lot of other people, it's very, very difficult for all sorts of personal reasons. For me, it's not. It's for you. I can stay at home forever. Good. Great excuse to not have to go and do things.
Not to have to talk to people and be social. Yeah, I do understand that. I mean, like, I'm privileged enough to have a job that's paying me well, and you know, I understand that not everyone is comfortable and confident with this stuff, but I'm lucky enough to have a job that's keeping me, you know, reasonably financially stable, and so I think it does sort of help my introverted instincts a little bit to be able to be able to stay at home and be antisocial.
Of course, I mean, if I had been laid off and had a house full of kids to look after whilst at the same time trying to get on with my day-to-day life or whatever, I'd be losing it. But I'm not, so I haven't. It's as simple as that. And I'm just being honest. I'm not going to sit here with and say, oh, lockdown is so terribly, terribly hard, when I'm here with a job that can be done perfectly well from home with no responsibilities at all. I mean, God would strike me dead with a bolt of lightning if I sort of feigned misery and abject trauma at my current state of existence, because this just simply is not true for me at all.
Yes, I think it's important to be honest about how your situation is. How has the switch to online lecturing been for you?
For me, it has been great. And it's obviously it's a mixed bag for different departments, different lecturers, different students, and so on. By nature, I'm a nerd to start with, so having to jump on the back of a whole bunch of new technology, well, I just thought, great, I get to learn how to use all of this new kit. In the Logic course this semester this year, we've set a university record. We have over 2,000 students enrolled in the course. That's the highest.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. It's wow. It's ever so terribly exciting. Over 1,500 of them are stuck overseas. There are 14 tutors, 92 tutorials. And having taught this last year to over 1,000 people under lockdown again, I made a lot of mistakes then that I wasn't terribly interested in repeating this year. So I sort of rushed out and brought a GoPro camera so I could film some nice high-res versions of the lectures, and I did the audio in Ableton with a whole bunch of lovely tweaks on the transients and these sorts of things. Now, for most academics, this would rather be shot in the head than have to do something like this. I was like, great, sitting up to 3 a.m, learning about color grading and DaVinci Resolve and all of these things.
Yes, I have heard that you've been color grading your lectures, I wonder honestly how many people are color grading their lectures that they're posting online.
Probably not many, right? Because it's a huge amount of work. It just happens to be this wonderful coincidence for me that the obligations of massively large-scale online teaching have collided head-on with some of my personal passions.
Well, it's nice because you can learn how to color grade while doing a job that wouldn't necessarily pay you to learn how to color grade.
That's absolutely right. I'll see if I can claim the GoPro on tax. Right? That's.
Yeah.
And when I'm giving the live lectures and things, I've got these multiple cameras hooked up to my computers. Like one's pointing at me and my record collection, and my studio monitors. The other one pointing at whiteboards and so on. Lovely audio interfaces for the microphone and everything. And weirdly, it's a real bonding experience, I think, with a lot of the students, because the situation is just so surreal that everyone drops their game face straight away and just says, well, blimey, what are we going to do now?
Yeah. I think also this time round, I didn't mean to get into talking about fucking lecturing and online university, but here we are. But I think this time round, it's a little bit different to last year as well, because last year, we started the semester off all in person, like normal. And then the lockdown hit, and I think a lot of people had to learn how to do this online stuff very quickly. Whereas this year around, I think we're all a little bit more practiced in it. So
absolutely, there are more resources available across universities. The professional technical staff at Sydney Uni, at my school at Sophie, are just unbelievable. They are so good. If it wasn't for them, it would have been a disaster. It just would have been me standing in the wind with my phone going, can everyone hear me? It would not have worked at all. There's an entirely new timetabling system has been rolled out to manage the fact that a huge number of students are not on campus, and I've been in contact with them every single day, trying to make sure that all of the remote students are in the right spot and so on. As logistically, it's been like a serious exercise. The number of people working behind the scenes to make it work is just absolutely phenomenal.
Well, I think the hard work is paying off. I think a lot of people have been talking about how smooth things have felt despite the situation. So, I guess thanks are due to you and to all the people who are working to make that stuff work. How have things been in terms of music for you over the last year or so?
I think this is very, very mixed. I think it's not all good. It's not all bad. It's a strange, rather new multi-dimensional experience. I think if I was, I don't know, playing music that thrived nearly solely on sort of having pits of people in a live environment, it would have been more difficult than it was. And for those people, especially people who run the DIY spaces around Sydney and so on, and everyone who takes part, where what's happening is incredibly cathartic and ritualistic, and if that space is not coming together, then the practice simply doesn't exist. This is why so many religious congregations have been breaking lockdown rules. You can't do it on your own. That's not what's happening.
That's not what they're designed
no,
for, I guess.
like you can't do a mosh pit over Zoom. You can't do a techno party over Zoom. To think that you can is to miss the point as starkly as do these fucking idiots who think it makes sense to have a techno DJ performing at an opera house or something like that. I mean, the number of things you need to fail to understand by the time you get to that point is just astonishing. But if anything, it's been a great opportunity for me personally to explore sound design at the extent of live performance. I've got to say, because there is within the sort of stuff that I do, there is a huge angle of sound design to it, and since you can't leave your home, I mean, I could play a gig to my partner and our indoor plants, and to my whiteboard markers. But it's just not. It's
Inky,
yeah,
right?
Inky, the famous whiteboard marker. It's that would perhaps not be time spent as best as it could be. So there are a lot of new collaborative projects have been born, have been finished and realized, and are ongoing. There are a lot of new, deep, and very, very meaningful friendships and relationships, some local, a lot international, that almost certainly just would not have been realized otherwise.
Yeah, okay, this is interesting because I think maybe this is partly because I was exposed to your music. The first thing I ever heard, or the first time I ever saw you play guitar, was actually online. It was a YouTube video, the rooftop gig that you do.
Oh, at
So that was
Dave's place in Amsterdam.
yeah, that one. That's the first thing of your. I don't think I've ever actually told
No,
you that.
I
That
don't.
was the first.
I'm really surprised.
The first of your music that I had experienced, and then after that it was Evil, experimental versus improvised live, which I have seen, which obviously was live. And then I listened to your Campbell Parade recordings from your latest album. So I feel like, for me at least, it's pretty 50-50, but I am quite attuned to hearing you play in a bit more of a solitary setting, if that makes sense. And I don't know if that's something with your music or if that's just the way that I have been exposed to it over the last sort of year and a half or 2 years.
I could say something really deep here that would be entirely, the connection would be entirely fallacious, but, man, because I was an only child, right? my music comes from like a place of solitude. I could spin that angle if I was going for identity politics or something. But I did.
I mean, is it identity politics or is that just narcissism? To be honest,
There might not be a difference. Okay, I would like to put to the floor the proposal that there might not be a much of a difference, if any at all. But I think when it stylistically, I've had exactly 2 guitar lessons in my life. One was in 1986 from my cousin and godmother Lisa, when she showed me 2 chords, and another one was with my friend Barry when I was living at his place in Cronulla when I was 15 years old. This crazy sort of surfer heavy metal house in Cronulla. What I was doing living there with no adults when I was 15, I don't know, but I was. And he showed me some Metallica riffs. It was at that was the house where Igor Cavalera from Sepultura came over to jam with us. That's a whole other story, but that really happened, and we have the photographs. That was like 1991, I think. Apart from those 2 lessons, I taught myself by just sitting up on my bed all night playing along to my favorite records and guitar players. And to this day, I don't know a single bit of music theory. People think I'm joking and just being facetious. You get sort of like rich kids saying, "Oh no, how do we ever learn?" Because you had 15 years of expensive music lessons. But no, really, I still play by ear. I learned by ear. I have nothing against music theory. I'm just lazy and can't be bothered learning any of it. I wouldn't mind being able to sight read. But most of my playing and the style you learn, the style is something you just get through just the act of practice for a long time, was just sitting there alone playing. So it's I don't think it's a surprise at all that it lends itself to sort of lonely, quiet, gentle scenarios, more so than it does perhaps rooms full of loud people talking.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think your playing does have this sort of like very I'm going to use the word again, but sort of somewhat introverted, sort of personal nature to it that I find fascinating. Have you? This is a clever segue. People listening at home, have a listen to this. Have you ever done any live streamed gigs before?
I don't think so. Hang on, Dahyo, it's been a hell of a 12 months. I don't remember what's happened. What? Seriously, have I done a live streamed gig? No, I think I was on my way to do the live streamed duo with Josh Shipton at Evil with our duo by Guignol, but there was a tendon eroding in my arm because of this, the break I'd had in my arm and all of the hardware they'd screwed into it. And I'd had this second operation to take out the hardware, and the night before the gig, I tried to repair my archtop guitar, which is, for those of you who don't know, they're like great big violins. They don't have a sound hole in the middle. They just have F-holes around the edge. So to re-glue a brace on the inside, it's this fairly elaborate exercise of, getting a syringe and attaching a tube to the end of it and putting in the needle on the end of the tube and filling it full of watered down wood glue and getting that inside the guitar with a bunch of mirrors and phone lights and stuff. It's not straightforward. And then to hold this brace in place, I was pressing on this big screwdriver and I jammed some bloody nerve in my hand. And then I couldn't move my hand, just like a dead fish. And I said, well, that's it. I've popped this tendon. They're going to have to cut one out of my neck and sew it in and everything. I was at RPA, the next day, all up until about 10 minutes before the gig. And then, I could move my hand again. And the guy there was like, no, of course you can't play a show tonight. You should not do anything strenuous with your hand for the next week or so. So I think I made it to that show to watch Josh.
I think I was there at that.
I watched Josh play without me, live streamed from behind the camera. That's as close as
I mean,
I've got.
those evil shows, because I did one. You were there for that, the Crude Answers.
It was
That was
fantastic.
live streamed.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that. Those live streams, they were live streamed, but it didn't feel the same way, like, to me, because it was in front of a live audience.
That it was.
So it did feel like a gig that they did sort of also stream. But the reason that I asked you to come on this week specifically is that on Friday, you will be performing a solo live streamed set, correct? Solo?
Yes.
Yes.
Very correct.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would. Firstly, thank you so much for the invite. I'm very, very excited. The lineup for the festival is wild, and I've never done anything like this from home. I'm obsessing over how to make it look slightly less messy than it does usually. It's like,
Oh, it's the festival of the lo-fi, man.
yeah, well, it could just be the festival of domestic chaos. It's that zoom line that everybody talks about. You know, everything in front of the zoom camera looks really nice, and the rest of your house looks like Mad Max 2 or something. The really exciting news is that the performance is going to be a launch. It's an album launch for a collaboration between myself and Ian Kubra, who makes music under the name Impala Guru. Ian is just an absolutely marvelous artist. He is from Russia. He is living in Moscow presently. He has a large, long-scale art project that is starting as we speak. It's in its initial stages, called Pangaea Ultima. That is Ian's explorations of meaning and artifice and gestures over distance conceived of very, very widely. And the first artifact of art that is emerging from this project is Pangaea Ultima Part 1, Sudden Approximations, which is a split album between Ian and Impala Guru and myself. And I got to know Ian's music through his work as Impala Guru long before I got to know Ian. I think I found it by accident. I think a friend, Bernardo Pacheco in Brazil, does a lot of recording and production for a label in Brazil. And this label that I'm embarrassed to say, I'm forgetting the name of this particular... Sorry, Bernardo, if you listen to this. I've forgotten the name of the label. I'm very sorry.
I'm sure you'll remember it as soon as we
as soon as I stop recording. I should look it up whilst you're saying something. And they had an Impala Guru album there, and I was flicking through everything on this indie label from Brazil going, wow, this is all really good. And the Impala Guru one just changed my life. I was just absolutely stunned. Funnily enough, talk about stories coming full circle and segues, it was when I was recovering from the first operation on my wrist and coming out of the anesthetic. You know, they drilled 7 holes in my wrist and put screws in. And once that internal anesthetic wears off, it feels for all the world like someone has drilled 7 holes through your wrist, because that's what they did, right? I really dug deep into this album of Ian's, and then his next album came out, and I reached out to Ian and said, you don't know me, but just for the record, if you are the same Ian Kubra who's been making all of this Impala Guru stuff, I think your music is absolutely fantastic. And he replied, and then we became friends, and here we are, right?
So you're doing a solo performance.
It is a solo performance of...
But it's a launch of a collaboration.
Exactly. It is a solo...
So how is that working?
The collaboration consists of 6 tracks. 3 are by Impala Guru, and 3 are by me. And
Right.
I will be performing elaborations on my 3 pieces from the first Pangaea Ultima album. In hopefully non-stop, unless I break a string, You know,
Oh.
they work together as a long composition as well. That's the point. With some extra stuff, you know,
With some extra
with
stuff,
some extra stuff, and that show, that set will be the album launch.
So this is on Friday, the September the 13th at 8 p.m., correct?
I thought it was Friday, September the 3rd.
3rd, yes, I just can't speak.
Right
September
here.
the 3rd. I was just testing you.
No, see, you're right, because originally it was Friday the 13th or something, but then Josh Shipton, he really wanted to play a gig on Friday the 13th. And since Josh does more for music in the city of Sydney than literally anybody else alive, frankly, he can have whatever he would like.
He's also he's very good at being spooky, I think, Josh.
He's also good at being adorable. He's
a lovely man.
Let's not
Josh
undersell.
is a lovely man.
He's many skills.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But yes, that will be on Friday, September the 3rd at 8 p.m. So I highly encourage people to listen to that. Just go to hibernationfestival.com. And yeah, like all our shows, I guess, just linked on the website. And you can also support Seb through his PayPal. Also highly recommended. It'll make you very happy. So Seb, let's talk about your... when I introduced you as... Well, I introduced you as a fantastic fingerstyle noise guitarist, but I also introduced you as a lecturer at Sydney University. Would you like to talk about that very briefly?
I would. I'd like... Here's...
Not so much in terms of like being a lecturer, but in terms of being a philosopher.
God. Something that what I'm hoping that we might be able to do is to sort of bark a bit of philosophy and philosophy of music at people, and see how they get on with it. There's a real struggle, I think, when it comes to articulating the meaning of non-representational gestures. Now, whether that is a non-representational painting, or a non-representational piece of prose, or a non-representational piece of music or sound, given that representational acts of meaning creation are probably the simplest. I just think about what we do when we're little kids. Like, we point to a dog and say doggy. We learn a lot of terms simply by ostension. And what is the meaning of this particular painting? Well, people will often ask, well, what is this about? What is this sentence about? What are you talking about? What is this story about? What's this drawing about? What's the sculpture about? That question betrays the extent to which we take meaning very often to just be exhausted by representation. On some level, meaning just is representation. And if there's no representation involved, then whatever the artifact is, then it's meaningless because it represents nothing. This is still a fairly popular view in certain circles, even those who theorize around sort of abstract noise art as well as art music and sound art and so on. And as it so happens, I think it's false. And one thing I'm hoping that we might get to the bottom of today is something like a tentative proof of concept for what type of things might be at stake for any theory of meaning that is a theory of meaning or approach to theories of meaning for gestures that are non-representational, for which the property of aboutness or the relation of aboutness is just wrong-headed from the start. How do we go about thinking about this? And what have people attempted to do in the past? Where have particular attempts collapsed? When people have admitted defeat, to what positions have they retreated? And to the extent that certain approaches are abject failures, what can we learn from those failures By learning, I mean something really positive. I mean, by learning, like what can we learn from them that will help us move forward in a way that's less likely to fail. I'm being entirely genuine here.
Yeah. Well, I think when you talk about representation and meaning and what a piece of art is about, to me, I am woefully inexperienced in terms of philosophy, but I think I am a semi-decent composer, and I have sort of experience in terms of sort of history of the aesthetic ideas of music to some degree. And it sort of reminds me of this distinction that people would always draw in sort of classical music circles. And there was this distinction between absolute music and program music, where program music would be, for example, like a Schubert lieder, like Gretchen Spinnrad, for example, which is from Faust, and I think it's from Faust, and it's about Gretchen sitting at a spinning wheel, and Schubert would write the music to represent the spinning wheel going up and down, and this sort of stuff. And the title would be called this, or like a Beethoven's Pastoral Sonata, which, the pastoral sort of gives the impression of, the pastoral life in Austria, Germany. And so this was program music, and then there was absolute music, which is like, Beethoven Piano Concerto 5, or Kammermusik by Hindemith, this sort of thing, where the music was not explicitly said to represent anything. It was absolute music, so it was just the music for the music's sake. Is this sort of what you're getting at?
If I was, it was an accident, because I don't know anything about the Western harmonic tradition at all. I don't know if Schubert came before Mozart or after Mozart. It literally wouldn't have a clue.
But I mean, in terms of this distinction,
I think it's not alienated. It's not entirely distinct. I'm just really not quite sure where the connections would be, just because I've never heard of this absolute music stuff is new to me. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I've seriously never heard of any of this stuff. Largely because I find it difficult to care. I've never enjoyed listening to music from the Western harmonic tradition, ever. So it's never made me want to explore its genealogy.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
What I was meaning by bringing up that distinction was that sometimes when a composer says, to me anyway, when a composer or someone who's creating a form of art says that their artwork is about something, then I think that can sort of make the interpretations a little bit more constrained.
Oh, okay. So
whereas if you were to just name it like Piano Sonata, just name it just a bland title that doesn't sort of hint at anything else, that might make the meaning and the meaning or the about or whatever that the audience is listening to, that might make them sort of think about that in a different way.
Oh, okay, yeah, that has got to be right, or at least something close to it has got to be right. If we're talking about, if pure music is supposed to be some kind of analogy to non-representational music, or something like this, where it's not supposed to be, music that is about the passions or the change of seasons or something like that, but is simply, it's its own excuse. Sort of. Is this the sort of thing that you're getting at?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Then that's the very turn in music that led to, and in art in general, right? That led to a lot of formalist interpretations of artistic works, because you're looking now at literally the formal properties of the composition itself. And those formal properties are its meaning. So now what you're talking about are literally the formal properties of a composition itself, rather than anything that it might be gesturing towards. And you get theories in visual art that are formalist in exactly this sense. You're interpreting the meaning of an artwork, and what you do is you talk about that artwork's formal properties and the meanings that they encode. And there's nothing outside of the artwork as an artifact that bears on its meaning or content whatsoever.
Yeah. Is this sort of what you're getting at with the idea of non-representational gestures?
I think formalism is going to be one response to non-representational gestures. I mean, you could be a formalist or a post-formalist when it comes to trying to analyze or think about the meaning of non-representational gestures. I just think that if you're a formalist, you're probably wrong, because if you're a formalist, what it means is that there's nothing outside of that artifact at all that is a constituent of the meaning of that artifact. So when we're describing, a great painting or a great composition or so on, the only facts that are relevant are the facts pertaining to the aesthetic properties of that artifact itself. To see how far wrong this can go, just how badly wrong it can go. There are plenty of formalist music theorists. I think heavy-duty academic music theory, not in performance or performance studies or faculties of art, but certainly in music schools and certainly in departments of mainstream philosophy, are still robustly formalist. It's like they've never heard of Descartes, let alone Warhol or anything like this. They're still talking about the meaning of the score and Mozart, yes, and these sorts of things. I mean, it's just infuriating. And now some of these people, I don't know, they escaped. I don't know who let them out. And now they're all over YouTube, and they're talking about Nirvana or something. And they're doing these formalist analyses of, a punk rock song, which is sort of elevating, missing the point to
the next level.
Yeah, to the next level. It's like asking a Dalek to describe a dinner party. There were 5 people seated around a flat surface on which there were 5 cylindrical liquid retaining conceptual. That is not what was going on at the dinner party. If you're asking someone to describe a dinner party, you're asking someone to describe sort of various threads of the spirit that are manifesting within that social interaction, within that space, within that moment, within that sort of moment of shared consciousness, and what it was like to be there. You're not asking somebody to describe the formal properties of the visual scene.
No, you're not.
No. But somehow people seem to think that this is a perfectly normal thing to do when we're talking about music. Say, for the 5th stanza, there was a loud atonal gesture. That is not what any of this stuff means.
I mean, it can be useful in terms of figuring out the technical aspects of how someone put a piece of music together.
Yeah, so that description of a dinner party is also useful from a technical standpoint of learning how to not tip a table over. It won't help you organize a dinner party, though.
No. So you do think that the sort of how do I put this? Like extra, the things that are not necessarily included in this score, or in the composition of any form of artwork, the things that, like the non-technical formal parts of things, like the context, for example, or the imagery, all that sort of stuff. That's important in terms of understanding.
Imagery is representational, right? What I'm thinking, suppose, I think visual art's such a great analogy here, because the general discourse about visual art, I think, is just slightly more sophisticated and sort of less homeschooled than is the general discourse around music,
Yeah.
If you put a great big abstract piece in front of someone, I think there aren't many people going to art galleries these days who even have like a passing interest in contemporary art. I mean, like vaguely passing, who will just be stupid enough to stand in front of it and ask, so what's this about? Or what's this? That's the sort of question that, your bored dad asks when you've dragged him along to the art gallery. It's kind of code for, I really don't want to be here. Can you just tell me what's going on so that we can
Or sort of like
leave?
your bloody high school English teacher. That's sort of as far as you get, I guess.
So, I had a really great high school English teachers, actually.
I mean, me too, but I mean just high school English in general.
Yeah.
I think
There is probably still the phenomena where people talk about the plot as if it's actually happening as opposed to the way the text is working. But people know not to do this with visual art now. I think that the general level of conceptual literacy has gotten to the point where people understand whatever it is that is happening, it's not merely the arrangement of paint on a canvas that matters.
Yeah.
Rather the arrangement of the paint on canvas is just a symptom. It's symptomatic of something much larger. And
for example,
well, in here's one particular example. In philosophy, there's this famous thought experiment about sense data. Sense data is just the sort of the phenomenological qualities of what it is to have a sense impression of a certain thing at a certain time. So there's the taste of chili itself, which can be described, the taste of spicy food, and then there's also the phenomenological experience of what is it like to taste really, really spicy food. How do you describe this to someone who's not tasted it? And there's this great paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?"
Right.
What is it like to be a bat? To orientate oneself through echolation as opposed to through visual inputs primarily, as we're want to do as the human species. And Thomas Nagel, when he's talking about it, says, well, what do you know, we can't do it. So perhaps one thing that might be possible might be with really great non-representational art is to know what it is like to be the artist in that moment of artistic creation, out of which that artifact emerged. And if you've ever been at, and of course you have been, this is such a physics thing, Dahyo, if you've ever been at a live music performance, right, where
I can't remember.
yeah, no shit, where there is just something really wild going on, and it's not people watching a performance. Now here's a great way to put it. There's a difference between me being on stage in a theater production or some such, and performing a scream. Where the scream is a performance. I'm not actually screaming in terror. I'm acting, right? That's a very different thing from an actual scream of terror. Now, people can perform a piece, right? But performing a piece is very different to manifesting one. And that difference is exactly the same difference as the one between performing a scream and actually screaming. Performing music and playing it are absolutely not the same thing. Now,
Right.
if you're a formalist, you are incapable of making this distinction. It's not part of your conceptual vocabulary. It simply is not there. To play the score is to play the score.
Yeah.
But when and I know you've been there, when you have been in a room, and it can be a noise gig or it can be a punk show, but I mean something where somebody is putting it on the line. So by putting it on the line, I mean themselves are on the line, where every single note, every vibration of their vocal cord is like it is a fucking matter of life or death. And for people who play shit music, you've got no idea what I'm talking about out there listening in Radio Land, right? But for those people who have been part of cultures and communities where this matters, then they know exactly what I'm talking about. That's why it was so hard for all of the music institution kids back in the 90s to understand why it was that, again, I use Nirvana as such a great example because it came out of nowhere at the time. Why it is that Nirvana was so popular, why it is that Kurt Cobain inspired so many kids to pick up guitars when they're like, man, that guy can't play guitar for shit, all this sort of stuff. Because he was playing music, he wasn't performing it. And that matters.
Yeah, so you...
And when that happens in a room, when you're there and it's happening, it's that absolutely defenseless moment of utter bravery, that total exposure of the self, is something that is shared with everyone in that room. Everyone is putting as much on the line as is the person who might happen to have a musical instrument in their hand. That entire orchestration, that ritual, is simply a conduit for everybody to share in a moment of irrepeatably cathartic experience. And they're the types of non-representational gestures about which I'm speaking. They manifest themselves in musical gestures, in visual artistic gestures, in automatic writing experiments, and many, many more. And also, almost certainly, in certain performances of written scores, right? Not
Yes.
to belittle composed music here in the slightest. I just like making fun of people who don't know about anything apart from
And I think
Western
that is
composition.
a completely fair enough thing to...
That's because they take themselves so seriously, Dave.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, I mean,
They do.
they can take one on the chin,
Yeah, I mean, fuck, I've spent the whole fucking weekend thinking about Schenker, so... do you think that in these sort of... When you make this distinction between playing something and performing something, do you think there's some sort of, like... some sort of genuine quality that comes from the former? So when you're playing something and it's this sort of powerful, like, life and death experience that you talk about, do you feel like the distinction is that this is more genuine than...
Well, of course it's more. It's more genuine. It's more genuine in the same sense that if I tell you honestly that, I don't like porridge. That's very different from me reciting the line, I don't like porridge, on a theatre stage. Although formally they might be the expression of exactly the same proposition, the meaning is entirely different. Even like small children know that the meaning is different. They know that one thing is acting and the other is not.
Yes.
And the sort of artistic performances I'm talking about is where there is just no part of the self left that is acting anymore. It is so difficult to achieve, especially in moments of improvisation where, the mastery of improvisation means simply that you are as selfless and totalized in a live scenario as you are at home when you're alone. I think most improvisers, if they're honest, I think in Mark Rebo's most recent book, he says, in ways that are much more eloquent than I can hear. He just says something along the lines of, "Gee, I really wish I could improvise live in front of people in a way that was even half as good as when I do it at home on the sofa." It's just incredibly difficult to bear ourselves in front of a room full of people like that, because we're so vulnerable. We're not just bearing our beliefs about porridge; we're bearing every aspect of our emotional, psychic being. It's absolutely terrifying. I'll never forget the first time I improvised in front of a room full of people. I was just going...
You do feel very sort of vulnerable, don't you?
Do you remember what was going through your head? Did you have an internal dialogue at the time?
Not really. I think I was just shitting myself, to be honest.
Yeah, then you were lucky, because the first time I did it, not only was I definitely shitting myself, but my internal dialogue was just literally, this is sort of verbatim, like, "Are you fucking mad? Like, what are you doing? This is rubbish.
Yeah.
Why are you playing this note? Why are you playing it like this? Oh my God. Everyone is looking at you and you have no idea what you're going to do in the next half a second. This is the dumbest decision that you have ever made in your life." And I'll tell you what, that's a little bit off-putting. It never
It is. Yeah, just a bit.
That never happens when I'm sitting up in bed leaning on the pillows playing. Not even once.
No, that's true. But I think also that, I mean, I think in terms of powerful cathartic performances, like, since we've been talking about this, it's just Lucas comes into my head, right? In terms of that.
Lucas Abela.
Yeah.
Yes, of
Yeldom.
course. Yeah.
Especially, like, I've seen some of the videos of his earlier shows when I think he was a bit more of a daredevil.
More of a daredevil?
Yeah, well, more than he is now. Like, the last few times I've seen him, he hasn't sort of bled that much, but fucking some of these earlier videos, he's been, like, chewing the glass and all this sort of... For those at home, just for some context, Justice Yeldom is a Sydney-based noise artist, and he makes his music by vibrating a sheet of broken glass against his face, and a lot of the time he'll end up with cuts and blood running all over it, and it's really gruesome and pretty full-on, but I think quite powerful in this sort of... Is that what you're sort of thinking about?
That is certainly an extraordinarily vital example of the very thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, I am talking about that. I'm also talking about, a bunch of self-taught teenagers in a punk band playing screaming two-chord music in a DIY space where everything from their grip on their instruments to the equipment is just barely holding together. Yeah. But they are screaming their heads off and leaping straight off the cliff.
So it is this sort of daredevil attitude.
Yeah.
I think.
Absolutely it is. That's the difference between representational gestures and non-representational gestures. So what do we do if we're trying to talk, if we want to be able to talk about the meaning of non-representational gestures as sensibly and successfully as we do with representational gestures? Where do we start? How do we go about putting together a sort of culturally and academically respectable body of thought that might constitute the beginnings of a theory of meaning that can be put suitably to such artifacts, because these artifacts are real. They exist concretely. They have spatio-temporal location. They have huge cultural importance. They're so important in some countries they'll get you murdered.
Yeah.
You know?
Which I think is. Do you think? I think so. So we need to start with. And I think we've done so successfully is sort of realizing the difference, and then I think it's difficult when you talk about meaning with this sort of stuff when it. To me, it seems like these things all need to have some sort of sense of spontaneity.
Perhaps, but maybe even just spontaneity in the way that one brings oneself to their realization.
Yes, and also a sense of risk, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely a sense of risk. Yes.
So, I mean, would you say that all of these gestures are, do they have a similar meaning? Is that what you're looking for?
No,
Way to...
not at all. I think what I'm searching for sort of desperately is a way to discuss their meaning. And your language is usually playing catch up to the universe. The world got here first. In the beginning there was information, then there came the word. The world and information got here first, and these sorts of practices are ones that we generate and we manifest. So our practices as a species will always be several steps ahead of our categories of description and representation and analysis. That's either that's either cause for depression or cause for elation, depending on one's sensibilities. Frankly, I find it elating. There are a few things since the age of, well, however old I was when I noticed that art and music really existed for what they were, that have excited me as much. I mean, what people are capable of artistically, I mean, it's just fucking incredible.
It is, yeah. Do we feel like the difficulty in sort of trying to describe the meaning in these sort of situations is that when you have some sort of raw, cathartic expression of emotion or whatever, and because it is kind of untamed in a way, do you think that some of the difficulty that we face when we're trying to describe what something means is that our language is not a tool that's designed to capture that sort of raw expression, or if it is, and then we try to do it in some sort of rigorous way, we sort of lose that meaning?
I think that absolutely is the problem. I think that very initial step that is so tempting and so seductive to equate an attribution, or to equate the meaning with some sort of description, that itself is an artifact that is coming from descriptive uses of language and gestures and descriptive gestures. The sunrise is wonderful this morning, the cat is on the mat. That's not what we're doing here at all in the world of the non-representational. So that entire, what we're looking for here
because
is...
language's entire function is to represent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whatever this sort of theory of meaning is going to be, it's not going to be something that supervenes on descriptions at all. And that's just why it's so difficult. I mean, even just the simplest content-laden acts, like saying, I left my keys in the car, or grass is green. You know, the stuff that we all start with in linguistics and philosophy of language, the simplest uses of language that we have already kept people busy for thousands of years with...
the sentence is false, yeah.
Yeah, with theories of meaning. It's been doing our heads in. So just nothing like truth conditional semantics is going to help us here at all.
So we need to construct a new system?
Absolutely. There is I'll put some money on this particular horse that there is no existing system of content. There is no theory of content, no theory of meaning, no semantic theory in existence today that can possibly do justice to the richness of meaning and the richness of content that is manifested via the very types of non-representational yet not meaningless acts that we're trying so hard to describe right now in this fairly esoteric conversation.
So how do you go about starting in terms of constructing a new system?
You do, like you do with anything else where you don't know where to start, right? You do a literature review, which is just a pompous way of saying, let's look at a bunch of other stuff that hasn't worked and make a list. You know, here's a bunch of crap ideas. And we've already looked at, fairly briefly at formalism. So let's just think about what post-formalism might be when it comes to artistic meaning. And we know this already. Post-formalism is that, okay, right. So works of art in general are not meaningless. They are meaningful. Be they representational or not, post-formalists are not going to take a stand here. But their meanings are not exhausted by their formal aesthetic properties. It's not merely what is happening on the canvas that delineates the boundaries of that which is relevant towards the meaning of the painting. It is not merely what is happening within the boundaries of a frequency analyzer or a spectrum analyzer that is, or a score for that matter, that is telling us what is happening meaningfully within a piece of music. And it's not surprising that post-formalist theories of artistic meaning had their heyday with modernism. I mean, modernist theories of art and post-formalist theories of art, I think those terms are often used fairly interchangeably. It was the modernists were trying to come to grips with abstract expressionism, and so there was a huge amount of interplay between art and theory there at the time. So of course, whatever the meaning is of an abstract artwork, you're not going to capture it with formalism. So if you are a desk-thumping formalist, you're just going to say, this abstract stuff is a bunch of crap from people who can't paint. Learn to paint a fucking apple first, and humbug.
Yeah.
And these people can all go jump in a ditch.
But you end up just getting stuck in the past if you do that.
You do, but this is the weird thing. In professional departments of mainstream sort of academic philosophy, when people are talking about the philosophy of music, it is singularly formalist.
Yeah.
Just the philosophy of music. It is singularly formalist. And in departments of performance studies and at art schools, for the most part, you don't have modernist theories of meaning in art. You have postmodernist theories of meaning in art, which they, the postmodernists will agree with the modernists to the extent that they're both post-formalists. The postmodernists agree that the whatever the meaning is of a piece of art, it is not exhausted by that artwork's formal properties. The difference is that for the postmodernist, there are no success conditions for interpretation at all. There are no success. There is nothing at stake when it comes to an interpretation.
And then to me, it's like, well, why even bother?
Well, this you've got me. I mean, if I was, I am sympathetic to postmodernism. I'm just not prepared to concede defeat to Warhol quite that quickly, right? I guess I don't know. Fuck him. I'm still up for the challenge. And similarly with music, I just think that there is something at stake with interpretation of non-representational pieces of art, even for that matter with representational pieces of art. Representational art still exists, even if I don't think the meaning can be captured formally. But I do think that failure of interpretation is possible. It's got to be. And in spite here's an interesting piece of empirical data from about 8 people to whom I've spoken about this. So there you go. On the one hand, they all repeat this sort of bullshit that they learnt at art school. It's just stuff like, oh, all interpretations are equally valid, or something like this. But then when I ask them, is it possible for somebody to misinterpret your practice? They'll say, well, yes, of course. Well, you can't have both, kids, right? You just can't. So, and if there's some postmodernist out there listening who thinks that you can because you got hold of Russell's paradox and you misinterpreted it, then we can go toe to toe over that one at a later date. I just for the masses the misinterpretation of the logical paradoxes by postmodernist art theories is equal parts tragic and also very, very, very funny. But so here's the take-home slogan. Universal quantification doesn't lead to paradox, right? It's unrestricted comprehension axioms that lead to paradox. If you don't understand what that means, then please go and find out before you think that we can't generalize over a domain without the threat of paradox, because that has simply never been true. But it's, it's tricky stuff. So here's where we're making some progress, right? So good, we've rejected formalism. We're not ready to give up, so we're not going to be postmodernists. That means that we think that there's a
gap. We're missing something.
Yeah, there are success conditions when it comes to interpretation. But whatever the criteria is for for interpretation, they're not restricted to the formal aesthetic properties of the artwork itself. Right? So what are these success conditions for interpretation? This is where we're now at the edge of some uncharted territory. And I think this is the direction in which we need to move. For straight down the line representational gestures, if I say something like, I've got 5 chairs in my university office, the success conditions for interpretation there involve you grasping the truth conditions.
Yeah.
But the truth conditions are just how it is the world would need to be organized for the statement I just made to be true. You don't need to know that those conditions are satisfied, but you need to know what they are. You need to know how...
You have to have a truth apt statement?
Yeah, for truth conditions to hold, right? And so the success conditions for interpretation, minimally, at the very least, involve grasping the truth conditions. Now, whatever the success conditions are for interpretation for non-representational gestures, they're not going to be truth conditions, because
that's what makes it really difficult.
Yes.
Because,
yeah. So here's our literature review, right? Here's everything else. We know we need success conditions, unless we just want to give up and say fuck it, like the postmodernist. And I don't. Just no way. I'll die on this hill. I just don't want to give up that easily. So we've got a real, I think, a strong, and I think ethically virtuous desire for genuine success conditions. Success conditions, by genuine ones, I mean that we can fail to achieve them. That we can get it wrong. One example of getting it wrong, it would be to walk into some sort of sound art performance and be a formalist about the whole thing. Then you've failed.
Yeah.
Right? Tragically, to misunderstand what it is that is happening. So what might it be? This is the new theory now. This is the new type of theory. This is where we might actually increase our understanding of what it is that we're all engaged in doing, and it might be a direction via which our theory can get a little bit closer to the tailwinds of practice.
Yes.
What do you think they could be?
Our success conditions.
It's
Well,
a genuine question.
Yeah, and I'm struggling to find a genuine answer. Part of me was thinking, okay, well, if we... My initial sort of gut response was like, well, what does the creator think it means or think it's about? And then if we look at it and we think...
No, hang on, wait. What do you mean think it's about?
Like in terms of interpretation of the performance.
No, I think this is... Then we're already talking past each other. If it's not representational, it has no aboutness.
It has no about.
It's not about something. To be about something, you need to represent it. It is so easy to just slip back into descriptive come representational talk of aboutness, because that's how we're so used to talking about meaning. As soon as you do
and
that,
this is my problem, I think, is because I keep going back into this. I'm like, well,
of course it's difficult. That's why people
that's why it's interesting.
are giving fucking formalist analysis of mid-80s punk rock gigs on YouTube, because no one else knows what else to do. It's a waste of time, but at least we know how to perform the analysis.
Yeah, so we have to find some sort of interpretation of said gesture.
And it can't be... We're not talking about something that the performer, for want of a better word, that the artist had in mind, because this is something they're doing. It's not something that they're performing. It's not a design.
Yes.
Right, so that's not going to work either.
So we can't give the artist some sort of like dictatorial say over the interpretation, because they don't really know either.
Or maybe they do, but whatever it is, it's not the sort of thing. It's something that they might know by acquaintance, as opposed to knowing by description, because it is the sort of thing that is not able to be described representationally, because it is not a representational artifact. Of course, we can represent the artifact to ourselves or some properties of it, but again, that's to be sucked into this tractor beam that drags us kicking and screaming back over to formalism.
Yeah, and this is the difficult thing, I think, is because we are trying to... I was about to say describe, but we're trying to provide some sort of framework for interpreting things that we struggle to, because we don't have the linguistic tools available. Correct?
Absolutely. We might not even have the conceptual literacy.
So if we don't have that, it's really hard in my head to understand how we're going to set up a way of coming up with these success conditions such that they can be wrong, so such that you can get it wrong.
Yeah.
That, for me, is the really difficult thing.
Yeah, isn't it tricky?
It is, right. Yeah. Because it's hard to... The same thing that makes it hard to makes the problem, like creates the problem in the first place, is the same thing that makes it hard to find a way to solve the problem, because we don't have the language.
Not yet. Right? There are lots of things for which we didn't have the language before.
Yes, absolutely. So we should construct a language, but I find it difficult to work out where to start with that, you know?
Because I think, well, the first place to start has got to be to get as clear as we can about the nature of the phenomena.
Yeah.
Right, and by eliminating other contenders, it's almost like chipping away slag. Whatever you've got left, no matter how mysterious it is, you know, that is what it is, and you've got to work with it. So we've got something that's non-descriptive, and it might be something that can have its meaning captured, even though the meaning is not being described. This sounds almost deliberately obscurantist, but if anything, it's this sort of inept and stumbling attempt to make something that's very elusive as clear as possible. So here's one idea that I think is, although very, very, very far from complete, and utterly unsatisfactory, is at least not obviously heading in the wrong direction. And it's this: what the success conditions will be here for interpretation is they will not be attributions of content. They will not be attributions of content at all. That's bordering on a description, and that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Rather, they might be manifestations of content. They might be an acquaintance with meanings rather than descriptions of them. And what type of meanings might these be? Now, they're not descriptive meanings, right? Rather, they might be something more like a mode of being itself. Remember that, what we were discussing earlier, like what is it like to be a bat?
Yes.
You know, what is it like to be in that room at that time? To breathe in all those other people's sweat, to be in that state of mind. Maybe the interpretation, the success conditions, are to literally know what it feels like to be in that very experiential state of mind itself. So the success conditions are manifestations of content and experiential states of mind themselves, rather than attributions of content or descriptions of states of mind.
So you would, if you could fulfill these success conditions, you would understand how it felt to be in that place at that time.
Absolutely. You would understand what it would have been like to... Suppose you're just looking now at... you're listening to sound art that was not performed live, say, but was made in a studio. Abstract sound art. Then to interpret it successfully would be to literally embody the entire phenomenological personhood of the creator during that moment of creation. Not to just know what it's like to be a bat, not to just know what it's like to see the color red for the first time, or not to just know what it's like to taste spicy food for the first time, but to literally know what it is like to be an entire person. Because if you've ever been, I know you have, if you've ever been in one of these spaces, and whether it's some huge techno party or an absolutely unhinged punk show where everyone is just screaming in their souls at this moment of entirely ritualized sort of rebirth. I mean, it's the whole point of these rituals, right? Is to bring everybody into these states of mind. You know how it is that it's no accident. I don't think that formalists just simply don't know what to say about music from Africa at all. Where the point of a whole lot of if not the vast majority of music that is, disdained as, that's just dance music. That music is just dancing to. It's designed to elicit and to codify bonds of personhood amongst civilizations of people. It's incredibly important.
It is, yeah.
And I think what is happening in non-representational art is performing a similar function, and is equally as important.
But in terms of setting up our our success conditions, we have to have conditions that, if they are met successfully, they will convey the somewhat more powerful than experience, but like the personhood and the I'm trying to find a better word than experience, but the experience of being that person in that time, the creator in that time. And if the success conditions, if you fail them, then that is not conveyed. This makes sense to me. I have no idea how we're going to create such conditions.
Well, we know how to create them through acts of listening or presenting ourselves to an artwork. This is why you see people in art galleries standing in front of a painting for 2 hours, swaying backwards and forwards. This is why, we will lie on the floor listening to that same piece of music over and over and over again. This is why at a techno party, 800 people will be there with looks of just astonishment on their face through that moment of shared consciousness. So we know what it's like when we get there. I think often it's pretty easy to snip someone out when they're faking it, when they're really just not getting what's going on. So if anything like this particular approach is not going to be just a complete train wreck and an immediate failure, then any attempt to say just capture a piece of sound, the meaning of a piece of sound art, for example, in writing, is not going to be a description of whatever the hell is going on sonically, but rather it's going to be a bunch of writing that stands some snowball's chance in hell of eliciting a response from the reader that is not entirely dissimilar to the response that reader would have if they were hearing the sound art.
Yes. This is true. I keep getting caught in this. I mean, this seems almost like an old problem. You mentioned the Red Room earlier. But if you have never been... If you grow up in a red room and you've never seen a color other than red, and someone tries to describe what blue looks like, how can you use language to describe a color like that? Other than taking them out of the room and is this sort of what you're getting at?
Absolutely. The difference is here what you're restricting yourself to is descriptions. And in the Mary thought experiment, where in the original version she sees red for the first time,
Okay.
And she knows every objective descriptive fact about what it's like to see the color red.
Yes.
But is there something that she learns when she sees the color red for the first time, namely what it's like to see the color red, and that's something that is over and above all of the physical facts? And whenever I've quizzed thousands of students about this over the years, and for those who don't realize what's at stake with the thought experiment, they all say, "Oh yes, definitely." And it's only when you realize what a landmine it is for physicalism that everyone starts clutching desperately at sort of horseshit ad hoc explanations for what's going, like, oh, she's learning a skill rather than a fact or something like that. How to pick out red things. Like, no one believes that. I mean, I want that to be true. I want that to be true really badly. But I think there's a first time for everything. There is a first time for seeing a particular piece of art, and there's a first time for being in a state of mind. And if the success conditions here are states of mind, experiential states of mind, then maybe there are other ways to elicit that very same state of mind. Because we're not talking about something as finite as, or as tractable as just seeing a red thing. It's something much broader, something that saturates all of our personhood at the time. It's not like there's just, when we're looking at some fantastic piece of abstract expressionist art that might be made up entirely of different versions of the color red, different shades of red, whatever their names are, with apologies to those of you who know color theory, then there's a lot going on there. But what it's like to see the color red's got nothing to do with it. It's something much bigger.
Yeah.
Right? It's much more global. It's a global phenomena cognitively.
Is it that... Well, you just mentioned physicalism, and I would say I'm definitely... Well, from what I've thought, I feel like I am a physicalist. I don't see myself being a dualist. But I do also understand that it would be very difficult to explain what the color red, or in our or in our context, like what being at one of these non-representational experiences is like. What that experience is like. It would be hard to convey that to someone without giving them the experience. What I am not sure about is, as someone who is a physicalist, is that a problem with physicalism, or is that a problem with our language and our capability of expressing these experiences / feelings?
It's a problem for physicalism to the extent that accounting for phenomenological experience within physicalism is a problem for physicalism.
Right.
What I'm suggesting, or the suggestion that I'm trying desperately to articulate, I think be a more accurate way of putting it, is something that is not bothered even remotely with adhering to any kind of descriptive come physicalist constraints. It might not be a coincidence that I already think physicalism is false. I don't want it to be false. It's heartbreaking.
I mean, I don't want to go too into that because otherwise we'll be here for another 3 hours.
Yeah.
But
so this is, earlier on when I said the important thing to do is to just take the phenomena seriously on its own terms. Don't start with theory. Don't start with the theory of meaning. just start with the phenomena. Start with the practice of art with which we're interested, and just take the time to get to know it on its own terms. And people who like to wax lyrical about, whether or not such and such a style of art really is or is not art, or such and such a style of music is or is not music, have spent no time at all, like literally none, within the communities of people who make this art, and for whom these gestures just mean everything, and who have just given up their entire lives to dedicate their lives to the pursuit of refining and exploring the manifestations of these sorts of gestures. I mean, how could you, know what? Well, I suppose some people out there do think you can do this, but it would be very difficult to do the philosophy of physics without knowing what physicists were up to. You would think, right? You would think. Or how could you possibly talk about the philosophy of maths if you don't know anything about maths?
Yeah.
If you're going to engage at all seriously with the philosophy of music as an academic and intellectual practice, then you have a moral obligation to have something resembling at least a passing familiarity with anything that has happened in music in the last, say, 150 fucking years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without putting too fine a point on it.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, you do need to engage with this stuff and to understand these experiences. The thing I don't like about that is then, to me, somewhat saying that we can't make a language that will adequately describe this without you going and experiencing it yourself.
We might be able to rearrange the one that we have already so that it does the job.
So that then you don't need to go to and be involved in one of these experiences.
I think you might need to immerse.
You see what I mean? Like,
you might need to immerse yourself. I'm sorry. I hope I haven't been giving the impression that the only place where this goes on is in a live show or a live performance. That's not what I mean at all. It's just that they're the
easiest way of.
Yeah, they're the obvious examples, right? It's the easiest way. But I mean, if you literally never listened to any of it, and also never listened to what any of the musicians and artists themselves had to say, if you've never actually taken the time to sit down and get to know the communities and listen to what they're doing, we're talking about a social practice here, then you cannot possibly understand. I think that much is real. If you are entirely removed, if you are ignorant,
yes,
of the practice itself, then and the context out of which it emerges, the motivations, the relationships, then wow, the chances of you meeting the success conditions are remote, I would say. So at the very least, it's not that hard to Google something. It's not that hard to stream a bit of music. It's not that hard to listen to interviews with some of the people who have made it, as well as some of the anthropologists who have talked about it. It's not mysterious. I'm just astonished that people think that they can do so without any of this.
I wish it were possible, not necessarily with the current language that we have, but I wish it were possible in order to be able to convey these experiences without someone having to actively go there. Not because I don't think people should. I absolutely think people should go and engage with the community. But I feel like if you can't convey this experience without the person actually engaging with the community, then have we failed to adequately come up with a system that describes these experiences properly?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, no one in their right mind thinks that you could just pick up a book on algebraic topology without having engaged with the community of mathematics at great length for many years and understand it.
But is that
Who-
because
It's
of
because
this-
it's because it's difficult.
Yes,
It's because
that's
it's
like
hard. Why? Who said that art was easy?
I didn't, but I feel like the language of mathematics is such that if you had the intelligence, you could learn mathematics through texts if texts were written. That the language exists to be able to convey that, but the language does not exist to be able to convey a live performance or one of these sort of experiences.
That you're absolutely right.
And this is what I wish, is that we had the language constructed so that if you had the drive / intelligence / whatever to experience this stuff, you could get those experiences through that language and you wouldn't have to engage with the community. Not that I think you shouldn't engage with the community.
Okay, so it's about. Sorry. Yeah. Now, this is my fault. Now I see your point. It's a good one. I'm hopeful that by focusing on modes of being and these manifestations of content as success conditions, that these same modes of being can be manifested and brought about and realized and caused to happen. Right? You know, it's this stuff. It shouldn't be optional, I don't think. Caused to happen by text in much the same way as they might be by a sonic environment. And that would involve absolute, deep mastery of the powers, the phenomenological affect of text and of spoken and written words. Someone like Burroughs tried so hard to crack this code and tried so hard to articulate this very idea. Something that has tripped up so many people is that they then revert into trying to not describe the idea, but manifest the idea, which is itself the manifestation, a trigger of manifestation of content instead of the description of content.
Yes.
So, but I don't, and maybe this is what some people have told me that people like Jacques Derrida were attempting to do at various points, was to cause the manifestation of something within the reader rather than describing that thing on the page. No, I don't know if that's true because I've never understood a word of Derrida, but it sounds right. And really, I haven't. Baudrillard was fine, but I gave up somewhere around Deleuze.
Oh God, yeah.
I really tried. It's just incredibly difficult material, but I think the process can be described, even though the process itself is not one that contains descriptions. The process is without descriptions, but the process itself is a perfectly robust artifact that we can represent through language. We're trying to do it now.
Yeah.
We're trying to talk about what could be possible through visual stimuli, sonic stimuli, and text, which is, as far as I'm concerned, text is informational stimuli. There's been a couple of wonderful events in the sort of recent past. God, it was probably years ago now. Led by Mark Ledbury. He's the Power Professor of Art History and Visual Culture and the Director of the Power Institute at the University of Sydney. Him and Joshua Berger. Joshua's a friend of mine. And they've been exploring synesthesia and trying desperately to just simply perform the very thing that we're trying to describe here.
Yeah.
What do you do? It's very simple. You get a bunch of people in the room and you put a stage at the front. One of them is someone who can paint and is also synesthesic, and somebody else who is a musician. And the musician takes off. And when I saw this, it was great. It was at a winery in Chippendale, so it was a good setting. And there was an improvisational saxophonist. Cameron was playing saxophone. And the artist whose name I forget, who's also synesthesic, literally trying to manifest the same. I don't know how to put this in the words. She was trying to paint a bloody thing that had the same internal meaning for her, that manifested the same modes of being as did the sound. And I had to ask this question. I said, look, if you have synesthesia, right?
Yeah.
If you see forms because you're hearing sounds, do visual forms make you hear internally sonic structures as well? And she said some do and some don't, right? It depends. And she said, because some sounds make us see things, but some sounds don't, right? It depends. I said, wow, well, what about the painting that you just painted whilst listening to Cam's saxophone piece, right? What does that trigger a sound for you? And she said, yes, it does. Does it trigger the same sort of state of being? She said, yes, it does. I was like, great, which one? Right? And she said, well, exactly the same one I just had when Cameron was playing his saxophone. Like, to me, internally, they're nearly identical. And she said, I'm a shit painter. It's not that good. If I was better at painting, it would be more fine-grained, and it would capture a finer level of the sonic architecture of Cameron's saxophone improvisations. But she said, absolutely. But both of them are just external conduits to what is, for all intents and purposes, the same mode of being. So maybe there's hope for all of us. This is the sort of thing that I think has got to be possible. We all know it's possible through a particular mode of experience. Like, say, for instance, when we're hearing the saxophone, when we're looking at the painting. But is that same mode of being accessible through another form of distal stimuli for all of us in the same way that it is for people who have certain forms of synesthesia? I'm betting everything that it is. Right? I'm betting an awful lot. At least for a representative sample of us. A statistically significant sample of the population.
I hope so.
So do I.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've gone way over time.
Good.
Because we've been talking for like an hour and 45 minutes.
Really? Oh,
yeah,
blimey.
but I think we both
there we go.
got way too in the conversation.
Can you? I feel free to edit some of this if you need to. Otherwise, let the whole thing rip.
Yeah, I think like people at home, if you have managed to sit through this, thank you very much for listening to us. I hope it was interesting. Seb, I hope that was an interesting conversation for you.
Of course, it was.
It's given me a lot to think about. I would like to talk more about it, but I don't think we can do that on podcast.
No, we can do a quick debrief afterwards.
Because my
and believe
poor
it or
computer is going to die trying to render this out in After Effects.
That's the one thing I have to do this afternoon before the meeting with the logic tutors is to process the WAV file for you and send you that today. That's my promise.
That would be good if you could. Thank you. But yes, to those of you listening at home, thank you very much for tuning in to the Hibernation podcast. This was Sebastian Sequoiah-Grayson. I hope our conversation was interesting for you. I think for me it was interesting, and I hope that if I find something interesting, someone else will too. So thank you for tuning in. Seb, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me on.
Seb's performance is on Friday the 3rd of September at 8 p.m. Make sure you tune in and make sure you give him lots of money on his PayPal. All right, thanks for being. Everyone at home, stay safe and wear a mask. We'll see you next time.